Hello, and welcome to your bedtime story. This week, I'm going to read to you from the book Rascal by Sterling North, and it's a Newbery Honor book. I actually found this in the trash last week with some other books, and I fished it out. And it's a book by the author. It's a recollection of his time as a child in Wisconsin in the early 1900s, and particularly about a year where he raised a wild raccoon who he named Rascal. I'm going to read some selections from chapter 6, which is titled October, and I hope you enjoy. Returning to school had always been a pleasure. It meant new pencils and composition books, the pencils smelling of cedar as you sharpened them. Most of the texts were dog-eared and scrawled with unfunny comments and crude drawings. But occasionally we were furnished 2 or 3 books fresh from the presses, fragrant of new paper and printer's ink. The beginning of this school year was particularly memorable because I was entering junior high school. The senior high school pupils, who sat in the forward part of the main assembly hall, were disdainful of those of us who sat at the rear, but we realized that someday we would be as grand as they, and we had our own loyalties and interests which saved us from suffering too deeply the stigma of being both small and young. At least 2 of my new teachers were greatly gifted. Miss Stafford made English a delight, and Miss Whalen loved biology as my mother had loved it. On the first day of school, she captured our attention by asking each of us about our pets. Almost everyone had a cat or dog or canary or pony, but I was the only one in the class who had a raccoon. Many animals were to be invited on various days to attend our biology class. She asked Bud Babcock to bring his little terrier to school, and other pupils to bring goldfish, a parrot, and a tame squirrel. But Rascal and I had the honor of receiving the first such invitation. On the morning Rascal was invited, I brushed and combed him until his dark guard hair shone and his gray underfur was as soft as lamb's wool. I used silver polish on his nameplate and saddle soap on his slender collar and leash. After all, it was to be Rascal's first day at school, and I wanted him to make the best possible impression. Fortunately, biology was our first class in the morning, so we didn't have too long to wait. Rascal's behavior was excellent. Clean, well-groomed, alert, and polite, he sat on Miss Whalen's desk as though he had spent most of his short life addressing biology classes. He asked a few questions about her glass paperweight, which, when shaken, produced a snowstorm over a toy village, and he gently examined this small globe of glass. "As you can see," Miss Whalen began, "raccoons are curious." Then she wrote on the blackboard, "raccoon," an Indian word meaning "he who scratches." Slammy Stillman raised his hand. "Does he scratch because he has fleas?" This produced laughter, and the teacher rapped lightly for order. I raised my hand and was acknowledged. "Miss Whalen, Rascal is perfectly clean. He goes swimming every day and he never had a flea in his life." "I think," said the teacher, "the Indians meant that raccoons scratch and dig for turtle eggs and other food along the shore. Sometimes they even dig for earthworms." Slammy scowled and slumped deeper into his seat. "Does this raccoon remind you of any other animal?" Miss Whalen asked. "He looks like a little bear," Bud Babcock said. "You are right, Bud," the teacher agreed. "He is a cousin of the bear and is sometimes called a wash bear because he washes all of his food, as we will show you in a few minutes." She took a piece of chalk and again wrote on the blackboard, "Procyon lotor," his Latin name, lotor meaning washer. I was intrigued because Miss Whalen was telling us certain things that even I didn't know about Rascal. Now she brought out a shallow enameled laboratory pan, which contained not only water, but, to my surprise, a crayfish. This she put before Rascal on her desk. "Now let's see what the raccoon will do." Rascal, like the wonderful little ham he always was, looked around the class and off through the windows while running his hands with a kneading motion all over the shallow pan. He knew exactly where the crayfish was, but he was showing off. Suddenly his body stiffened for a pounce, and 2 seconds later he had his prey fast in his grip and was watching it blissfully in anticipation of his feast. By this time the class was as happy as Rascal, and almost everybody clapped. "Raccoons are omnivorous," Miss Whalen said, writing the word on the blackboard. "This means they will eat almost anything. They live from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from southern Canada to Mexico. They have from 2 to 6 raccoon kits every May, usually in a hollow tree. And these kits mind their mother very well, trundling after her as she teaches them how to fish at the edge of the creeks. They are friendly animals unless attacked, but can sometimes kill a dog if backed into a corner." Miss Whalen asked me if I would tell briefly of my experiences with my raccoon, and I stood before the class, petting Rascal as I talked. I think we had the attention of all but Slammy, particularly when Rascal climbed on my shoulder and started vaguely playing with my ear. "I even sleep with him sometimes," I confessed. "He's a wonderful pet." Everyone wanted to touch him after that, so one by one my classmates came up and petted him, some of the girls pretending to be a little frightened. Slammy was last of the line, and he slouched up, shifty-eyed and sneering. I was watching for trouble, but was a moment too late. Just as he reached the raccoon, Slammy stretched a heavy rubber band and snapped Rascal to the face. Very rarely before had I heard Rascal emit his scream of rage, but this was pure fury, a fight to the death cry, and in a split second Rascal sank his fine, sharp teeth into Slammy's fat hand. Slammy yelled until you could have heard him in the assembly hall. He danced around shaking his hand, screaming, "Mad coon! Mad coon! You gotta shoot him now! Mad coon!" Miss Whalen's voice was cold and severe. "Slammy Stillman, everyone in this room saw what you did. If you think this is a mad raccoon, then you need no other punishment than the worry you will experience wondering if indeed you have rabies. Here, use some of this iodine on your little bite. Class is dismissed. Sterling, will you stay for a moment?" I didn't know what my teacher would decree, but it proved almost as severe a punishment as she had given Slammy. She said, "I'm sorry, but under the circumstances, you will have to cage your raccoon constantly for the next 14 days. If he should show signs of rabies, we would still have time to get past your treatments for Slammy." "But he isn't rabid," I protested. "You saw what happened." "I certainly did, and I feel certain he is a perfectly healthy animal, but we can't take a chance." She was silent for a moment. When she turned back to me, her mood had changed, and she said quickly, "Rascal is a wonderful pet. Thank you for bringing him to class and for your good oral report." She petted the raccoon and added, "You'd better take him home to his cage, Sterling. I'll explain to the other teachers why you'll be absent for the rest of the day." As I pedaled homeward with Rascal in the bicycle basket, he had already forgotten his recent fight. It was a crisp, clear autumn day as we entered the cage to begin the 2-week sentence. I had a crazy, affectionate thought. If they have to lock up Rascal, they'll have to lock me up with him. We sat eating soft-shelled pecans. Wishing we could stay side by side forever, sharing a meal in each other's company. Slammy, unfortunately, did not die of rabies. In fact, the punctures in his hands healed almost immediately, but the punishment inflicted on Rascal and me continued. We were jailmates for as many hours a day as I could join him. Rascal was beginning to get slightly plump in preparation for the winter. I gave him any food he wanted, so we were not too unhappy in his cage. On the 14th day of his confinement, when he had not shown a single sign of any sickness, I opened the door and we frisked out into the autumn world. We walked up the street to Crescent Drive and turned down the country lane through a world ablaze with autumn. Hope you enjoyed your bedtime story tonight. Get some good sleep out there, and I'll see you next week.